Well, femicide is women being murdered because they're women. And how does that work in Jamaica? Well, of course, you'd have to look at our colonial past to understand the vulnerabilities that especially women of African descent have faced in this country. And from the minute that people were captured in Africa, you're about your business and somebody comes and captures you to sell you into slavery. And you're marched overland for over 300, 500 miles in some cases. Can you imagine that? From here to Montego Bay. And then you're incarcerated in a dungeon underneath what is called Cape Coast Castle, built by the Danes. And that's when they occupied Ghana, what we now know as Ghana on the west coast of Africa, for over 200 years before they sold to the British in 1850. And you're underneath this castle for 5.5 months, being stored like objects before being transshipped across the Atlantic for another 3.5 months. And you get to the Caribbean. And both for production and for reproduction, you are exposed to extraordinary violence in every sphere of your life. I mean, I don't know if you've read Thomas Thistlewood's diaries. He documented in a very precise way what took place on plantations, from the seasoning farms where men were routinely sodomized, especially in front of the community to demoralize the community. And women, of course, were routinely raped for both the pleasure and the production purposes that the plantations were purposed for. So when we talk about femicide, the lifespan of someone who experienced enslavement was not more than 20 years, 30 years at the most. And you had children that you saw sold off as objects again for profit. And so emotionally, psychosocially, you experience death on an everyday basis. Never mind what you physically experience by being beaten or starved or raped again or yes, overworked and murdered in so many different ways. If you again read Thomas Thistlewood's diaries, you're shocked at the devices that people invented to defecate in somebody's mouth, for example, and to make sure that they held it there for days before they had to swallow. There are people who experienced that, committed suicide, and women committed infanticide to make sure that their children wouldn't grow up in a system like that. So we have inherited wounds in an epigenetic manner because it has passed down in our genes. And I think that, what we experience now with women being, again, exposed to murder in a very routine way, it wasn't even like that 30, 40 years ago, because when the violence started in the 1960s, it was more of contestation between men. And, it was political violence in the 1970s, coming up to 1980, which was a watershed when some 800 people were killed in political violence, which, of course, is another story. And this is where the two main political parties, the People's National Party and the Jamaica Labour Party, have armed their supporters to fight against each other, ultimately to colonize the votes in enclaves that we now call garrison communities, because they're politicized so that people of a certain stripe are the ones who benefit from the housing arrangements and that kind of thing. So in the 90s, a pattern emerged where women would be surrogate victims. So you can't catch Kwaku, you catch him shot, where a man would be the target of another man's violence. And you can't find him, so you kill his mother or his sister or his child. And so we see this pattern emerging in Jamaica until now. Women become direct victims themselves. You never can get over the enormity of the incident with Kay Lamont in St. Thomas, where she had been robbed, telling her sister about it. She was swearing, and the policeman attacked her, killed her. She was pregnant and almost killed her sister too. So you think that there's a line that we have crossed because the sacredness of life has dissolved, and the indiscriminate kind of killings that we now see shows that we have lost values and attitudes that we were trying to retrieve in the 80s and the 90s. Under the P.J. Patterson government, that was a whole big project. But I don't think they succeeded in retrieving that lost sense of decency.